There was once a monk who hadn't spoken in over 20 years, not because he couldn't and not because of a sacred vow. He simply chose not to. His silence was not rebellion, it was understanding. High in the mountains, hidden beyond rivers and pine forests, he lived in a monastery where time seemed to slow down. Locals called him the monk who forgot to speak, and while many joked about his silence, those who visited him often left transformed. He didn't need words to teach. His presence did that on its own. Far away in a loud, restless city, a young man struggled. Life, to him, felt like a race with no finish line. He was overwhelmed by expectations, by comparisons, by the need to constantly prove himself. He had read self-help books, watched motivational videos, even tried meditation apps. But none of it touched the part of him that felt truly lost. One evening, during a rare moment of stillness, he overheard a conversation about a monk who hadn't spoken in decades, yet helped people find clarity. It sounded absurd at first. How could someone teach without speaking? But something inside him stirred. Words had failed him. Maybe silence wouldn't. The next morning, he packed lightly and began the long journey to the monastery. He walked for days through rain, wind, and exhaustion. When he finally arrived, his body was tired, but his spirit was alert. The monastery was simple. No gold statues, no towering gates, just silence, nature, and a sense of presence. The monk welcomed him with a gentle bow and a soft smile, then turned and walked away. The young man followed. He was given a room, food, and no instructions. Days passed. The monk never spoke. The young man asked questions about life, purpose, love, failure, but the monk only listened, nodded, and returned to his tasks. At first, the silence was maddening, but then a shift. With no one answering him, the young man began answering himself. He noticed the sound of his own breath, the way his thoughts rushed in, unfiltered. He noticed how impatient he was, how much of his identity had been tied to validation. The monk gave him chores, sweeping, cooking, carrying water. At first, he resisted, but then he began to embrace them. The rhythm of simple tasks became a meditation. In the stillness of the mountain, he began to hear something he hadn't heard in years, himself. He realized how often he had listened to respond, not to understand, how often he had spoken out of fear, anxiety, or ego. In silence, he began to hear life in a deeper way. The chirping of birds at dawn, the quiet sighs of the wind, the wisdom in his own thoughts, when given the space to rise. Months passed. The young man no longer asked the monk questions, not because he had no doubts, but because he had made peace with them. He understood now that not every question needs an answer. Some questions simply need patience. He started noticing things. The way the monk always smiled at those who were angry, how he paused before reacting, how he listened fully, even in silence. The monk hadn't forgotten how to speak. He had remembered how to listen. On the day of his departure, the young man felt different, lighter, quieter, not in voice but in soul. He bowed deeply before the monk. There were no words to say, and none needed to be said. But then the monk did something unexpected. He spoke. "You came looking for answers," he said, his voice calm and deep from years of silence. "But answers are loud. Truth is quiet. You were not seeking knowledge, you were seeking peace, and peace lives in listening." The young man froze. That single sentence carried more weight than all the lectures, books, and videos he had ever consumed. As he walked down the mountain trail back into the noisy world, he carried the silence with him, not as emptiness, but as clarity. He no longer rushed to speak. He no longer filled every moment with noise. He listened, not just to others, but to life, to the spaces between the words, to the lessons that reveal themselves only when we are still enough to notice. He learned that listening is not about waiting for your turn to speak. It is about presence, awareness, humility, and that sometimes those who speak the least carry the deepest truths.